Hello, my name is John McLeese, and on behalf of our rector, the Reverend Wes Smedley, I would like to welcome you to the final session of our four-program series on seeking truth and justice in Palestine, Israel. Being hosted here at St. Chrysostom's Episcopal Church in Chicago, in fulfillment of our vow as Episcopalians to strive for justice and peace among all people, and to respect the dignity of every human being. Reverend Smedley could not be here tonight, but he asked that I extend to you our appreciation to all of you for joining us in this inquiry, in this journey. In this series, we have listened to the voices of Palestinians describing the reality of the situation in Israel-Palestine. We've dug into the history of the situation in this part of the world that brought us to where we are today, focusing also on the role of the United States. And we have heard from Jewish voices calling for justice in Palestine. Tonight, we will consider what we can all strive to do for justice and peace in the Holy Land. We are privileged to welcome tonight as our speaker, our very own Canon Naim Ateek of the Episcopal Diocese of Jerusalem. And to introduce him and to lead our discussion, Newland Smith, a much beloved leader in attending to issues of justice here in our Chicago diocese over many years. Newland is a member of St. David's Episcopal Church in Glenview and of the Peace and Justice Committee of the diocese. We all rely on him for his wisdom and his wealth of knowledge and insight gained from his many years as librarian at the Seabury Theological Seminary and as archivist of the diocese. As we begin tonight's session, please pause for a moment and pray with me, as we did with Wes in the first program. Heavenly Father, in your word, you have given us a vision of a holy city to which the nations of the world bring their glory. Behold and visit, we pray, all cities of the earth, Jerusalem, Gaza, and Ramallah, Damascus, Kabul, and Baghdad, Baltimore, Detroit, and Chicago. Renew the ties of mutual regard which form our civic life. Send us honest and able leaders. Enable us to eliminate poverty, prejudice, and oppression, that peace may prevail with righteousness, that justice may prevail with order. Grant that men and women from different cultures and with differing talents may find with one another the fulfillment of their humanity. This we ask for your love's sake. Amen.
Amen.
Amen. Newland?
Thank you, John. Just a reminder, all of you attending this final session, after the presentation, we heartily encourage questions from any of you. If you're in the church, raise your hand and someone will give you a mic. If you're attending virtually, please put your questions in the chat. We ask you to formulate them briefly so we can accommodate as many as possible. Our speaker for this fourth and final session is the Reverend Naim Ateek, an Anglican priest in the Diocese of Jerusalem, president of Sabile Ecumenical Liberation Theology Center, one of the authors of Kairos, Palestine, a moment of following two books, Justice, a Palestinian Theology of Liberation, 1989, Cry for Reconciliation, 2000. Naim is well known in Chicago as he participated in the 2005 Chicago Sabile Conference held at the Lutheran School of Theology in Chicago and the 2013 conference held at St. James Cathedral. At the latter conference, Naim Ateek and Brant Rosen, who spoke last week, led a workshop on liberation theology as Naim celebrated the 25th year of the founding of Palestinian liberation theology, while Brant Rosen articulated a Jewish theology of liberation that seeks to renew the prophetic heart of the Torah and rabbinic traditions. I would like to begin our conversation with a prayer that was used at one of the worship services at the third International Sabile Conference held at Bethlehem University in 1998, lighting the candle of hope. Oh God, you bring hope out of emptiness, energy out of fear, new life out of grief and loss. As Mary returned to mourn, yet found unspeakable joy, so comfort all who have lost their homes through persecution, war, exile, or deliberate destruction. Give them security, a place to live, and neighbors they trust to be with them, a new sign of peace to the world. Amen.
Amen.
So Naim, let's begin this conversation this evening with the 1947-1948 Nakba. What is your memory of this catastrophic event?
Okay. Well, I was 11 years old in 1948. And my family and I were living in Bisan. It's a beautiful small town. It was the regional capital of eastern part of Palestine, where close to the Jordan River. My father had his business as a goldsmith and silversmith. The town had around 6,000 people at that time, and it had 3 churches, an Orthodox church, which is the Church of the Land, and a Catholic church, and then a very small Anglican or Episcopal church. And we enjoyed a very good life. My father's business, he was the only jeweler in town. It was very good because around Bisan, we had over 22 villages, Palestinian villages and towns. But you know, the number of Jewish, yeah.
You're told, so just continue.
You know, you asked me the question about 1947-48, and I briefly mentioned that we were living in Bisan. That's my home. That's where I was born. It's very close to the Jordan River. It's just probably a mile east of Bisan. You are at the Jordan River. That's where I was born. And I lived in Bisan until the Zionist Jewish militias came and drove us out. And we became refugees in Nazareth, and we lost everything. My father lost his business. I mentioned that my father was a jeweler, goldsmith, silversmith, the only one in town. So we had good business. My father was very attached to the church. He was like a lay reader because we only had, the priest came only once a month from Nazareth or Haifa to give us communion. Other Sundays, my father and 2 other lay people took the morning or evening services. And then we lost everything. We did not leave except with the clothes on our backs. And we came to Nazareth, and I was brought up in Nazareth, went to primary school and high school in Nazareth. So that's very briefly what happened for us in 1948. We were not alone. Tens and hundreds of thousands of people happened to them what happened to us. And so by the end of that war of 1948, over 700,000 Palestinian were driven out, or some of them fled and could not get back to their homes. And then the Israelis bulldozed most of the towns, over close to 500 towns that were bulldozed by the Israeli Zionists and the State of Israel. But some of the villages or towns were not bulldozed, and they became the new homes for Jewish immigrants that came into the country at that time. So this is a very brief. I can answer more questions in details, but that's what happened. That's my answer to your first question.
And, as we know all too well, the Nakba was not just one event, but it's continuing right into the present. But thank you so much.
I can't hear you, sorry.
Right, I want to move on now to the beginnings of Sabeel in the early 1990s. I know that you were, I can't
hear you, sorry. I lost you.
It's on. Right.
Now
Naim,
I can hear you.
All right, Naim, I know that you were at St. George's Cathedral, and Sabile had its beginnings while you were a priest at the cathedral. Could you say a few words about how Sabile came into being?
Yes, thank you. Yeah, 1987 is a crucial date because that's when the first Intifada, the uprising of the Palestinians against Israeli occupation, started in 1987. I had been at St. George's Cathedral a couple of years before that, and I felt that the Intifada, the first Intifada, energized my ministry. So I was preaching in sermons that related to the situation of the Palestinians living under now the oppressive Israeli government that was trying to crush the Intifada. So every Sunday after church, we started meeting together in order to reflect on the sermon that was mainly preached, that was mainly dealing with justice issues, the occupation, the people who were hurting, the people who were injured, the people who were killed. Some of my own parishioners were taken to jail. So we were trying to deal with the situation at hand. And this discussion after church and reflecting on the sermon that I had preached was the beginning of a time in which people's faith was being challenged. And I think it became so clear to many of our parishioners and other people that used to come to pray with us from other churches that it became clear to many of them in the discussion that Jesus himself lived under occupation, that Jesus himself was born under occupation. He did all his teaching, all his preaching, all his relationships were done under the Roman occupation of the time. And that, so Jesus became for us our liberator. How did he how did he relate to the Romans? How did he relate to his fellow Jews? Some of them were cooperating. They were colluding with the occupiers and so on. So that was the beginning of what I would say Palestinian liberation theology, and this led to the dissertation that I had already been preparing, and it was based on my dissertation and in graduate work in Berkeley, and then we and then Orbis Books published my first book, Justice and Only Justice, A Palestinian Theology of Liberation. That was really the beginning. And then when Palestinian liberation theology, which was taken out from the book that was already published, we were able to decide with a group of friends with me from different churches that were kind enough to work with me. We thought we need to have a center that can help us translate Palestinian liberation theology into programs, and that's when Sabeel came into being. Now, what is significant about Sabeel is that this word is found, this is an Arabic word, but it is found in the New Testament in the book of Acts, because Sabeel means the way. And the people, the followers of Jesus Christ after the resurrection, were known in Jerusalem as the people of the way. They were the people of Sabeel. They were the people who were following the way, or Jesus who said, I am the way and truth and life, So that was the beginning of Sabeel. And then that started us with lectures and Bible study and trying to really help our people how to respond to the occupation, to the oppression of the Israelis, but from the perspective of our Christian faith. And following Jesus, we believed that we must be about nonviolence, that Jesus, our liberator, was a nonviolent person, and he was even killed by the occupation forces in his day. And so that's why Sabeel came into being, and that was in 1992. So just and while the Intifada was still going on, and from then we were beginning to continue with the Bible study and with Palestinian liberation theology, trying to help our people understand it and try to live it through nonviolent actions and study.
Thank you, Naim, so much. That's a powerful witness to the gospel through the Palestinian Christians. And we should note that Sabeel has had a presence not just within Palestine, Israel, but also has brought hundreds of people to its international conferences and has established a number of regional groups, including Friends of Sabeel North America. So thank you so much for your leadership. I would like now to move on to your work as one of the authors of the statement, Kairos, Palestine, A Moment of Truth, which was published in 2009. I believe that 16 of you worked for a year in able to produce this statement. Would you say a few words about that work and what the heart of this moment of truth call is?
Thank you for the question. Yeah, I mean, as you mentioned about Sabile started having their international conferences during maybe around 20 years after Sabile started. We had around 10 international conferences. But in 2008, even before that a little bit, a group of us felt that we need to come up with another statement that is much more ecumenical. So we got together in that time for providentially the Latin Patriarch of Jerusalem, Michel Sabah, who is a Palestinian. He was the first Latin Roman Catholic Patriarch in Jerusalem. He is a Palestinian. So he, at that moment in before 2008, he had just retired. And we invited him to join our group. And so we had representatives, not official representatives, but we called in a number of friends, clergy from the different denominations, and lay people also. And though around 16 of us, started getting together and reflecting on, we were inspired, obviously, by the work of the Christians in South Africa, because in 1985, they came up with their own Kairos document, 1985. So that was one of the inspiration for us. And we said, we need to have a Kairos Palestine document. So we started working on it. And then we contributed, every one of us contributed to putting together this document. We were very thankful that Patriarch Sabah drafted the first draft was in Arabic, and then we worked on it. I remember some nights, not only myself, but other people, including one of my lay women from our church, who was a good theologian. Her name Cedar Duaibes. She and I spent many hours editing the document, and finally it was translated into English before we invited a good number of people from around the world to come and launch it in Jerusalem. And it was launched in 2009, as you mentioned. And if we have time, I can maybe just highlight one or two or three passages, depending on the time as you feel, Newland.
Yes, Naim, please go ahead. And also, I was struck by the number of audiences this call is directed to, because it's far more than the Palestinian Christians. It reaches out to really the entire world.
Yes, we were very thankful immediately. It caught the attention of people from around the world. And we had people that started being or feeling the impact of this, and started to work on their own responses to the Kairos document. A number of responses from the United States and from other places in the world that were written as a result of that. But if I may, let me just read about, for example, about resistance. We say in this, we say that our option as Christians in the face of the Israeli occupation is to resist. Resistance is a right and a duty for the Christian, but it is resistance with love as its logic. It is thus a creative resistance, for it must find human ways that engage the humanity of the enemy. Seeing the image of God in the face of the enemy means taking up positions in the light of this vision of active resistance to stop the injustice and oblige the perpetrator to end his aggression and thus achieve the desired goal, which is getting back the land, freedom, dignity, and independence. So that gives you an idea about maybe just one more quote that, at the end of the document, we address ourselves not only to the Jewish people and to the Israeli government, we address the Muslim community. We address the churches. Let me just mention when we address the churches of the world. Let me just, the churches of the world. Our word to the churches of the world is firstly a word of gratitude for the solidarity you have shown toward us in word, deed, and presence among us. And a word of praise for the many churches and Christians who support the right of the Palestinian people for self-determination. But we also addressed other people who were Christians in this country as well in other countries that we feel have not really been truthful and have not been working for justice. So we ask our sister churches not to offer a theological cover-up for the injustice we suffer, for the sin of the occupation imposed upon us. Our question to our brothers and sisters in the churches today, are you able to help us get our freedom back? For this is the only way you can help the two peoples attain justice, peace, security, and love. And finally, I just want to, we talk about Jerusalem, we talk about the importance of international law for Jerusalem, and we end with just few lines. We say, in the absence of all hope, we cry out our cry of hope. We believe in God, good and just. We believe that God's goodness will finally triumph over the evil of hate and of death that still persist in our land. We will see here a new land and a new human being capable of rising up in the spirit to love each one of his or her brothers and sisters. So it's a beautiful note at the end also.
Right. Thank you, Naim, so much. This is truly a prophetic document that was sounded out again just a year ago with a cry of hope, which is even a more urgent call to all of us to be in costly solidarity with the Palestinian Christians and all people of goodwill. So thank you. And Naim, I want you to stay with us. I'm going to say a few words about resolutions of the Episcopal Church's General Convention. And then Priscilla is going to have suggested calls to action, but then we're going to have a time for questions and answers. So thank you so much for joining us, and we'll move through the other parts of this session, and then there'll be some questions.
Yes.
I just want to take a very brief look at existing Episcopal Church policy on Israel-Palestine based on General Convention resolutions. And I'm just going to talk about three. The first dates back to the 1985 Convention, a resolution in which the Episcopal Church expresses its opposition to the movement of the U.S. Embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. Then in 1991, there was a very long resolution, but the last resolve reads as follows: recognizes that a distinction exists between the propriety of legitimate criticism of Israeli government policy and actions and the impropriety of anti-Jewish prejudice, which I think is very important, especially in these times. In 2003, recognized the Israeli security wall currently under construction as an impediment to the implementation of the performance-based roadmap. There were no resolutions in 2006, 2009 conventions. In 2012, there was a resolution that called for interfaith dialogue and positive investment, resulting in the Executive Council's Ecumenical Justice Committee to invest $500,000 in the Bank of Palestine. Given the 9 long years of the failure of the Episcopal Church to break new grounds for justice for Palestinians, in August 2017, a year before the 2018 General Convention, a group of 5, including Naim, Ateek, and myself, met for an hour with the presiding officers of General Convention: Michael Curry, the presiding bishop; Gay Jennings, president of the House of Deputies; and 3 members of the presiding bishop's staff. Naim made a fervent plea for General Convention to take decisive action for peace with justice for Palestinians. So finally, at that 2018 General Convention, 5 strong resolutions on Israel-Palestine were adopted. One was to safeguard rights of Palestinian children. The other significant one was adopt the Evangelical Lutheran Church of America Action on Israel-Palestine. And it directed the Committee on Corporate Social Responsibility to develop an investment screen for Israel and Palestine based on human rights and the acts of General Convention. As a result of this resolution, the Episcopal Church finally moved beyond its policy of corporate engagement, a position taken by the Episcopal Church's Executive Council in 2005. At this time, I invite Priscilla Reed to talk about some calls to action that we can take.
This series of 4 talks has provided a broad view of the conditions Palestinians face in the Holy Land. We've aimed to situate our approach in a theological moral context that inspires compassion and respect for the dignity of all human beings, rather than limiting our discussion to politics. We've also aimed to create the conditions for a respectful conversation on issues that are often controversial. We've let you hear many Palestinian voices, which have too often been ignored. We want now to suggest some ways to take action on current problems. Many of you we know are longtime advocates for Palestinian human rights and already engaged on these issues. For others, they're relatively new. Some of the proposals we make point you to the Episcopal Peace Fellowship Palestine-Israel Network that we refer to as EPF-PIN. Its site will provide links to many organizations working effectively in this country and abroad, especially, of course, in Palestine. We all work in alliances, faith-based, interfaith, secular organizations, all collaborating to defend Palestinian human rights. So let's consider some ways to take action. The websites listed here are also appearing in the chat. Number 1 provides the website for EPF-PIN. Number 2 on the screen concerns the recent move by Israeli authorities to designate 6 Palestinian human rights groups as what they call terrorist, a first step in shutting these organizations down. EPF-PIN and Jewish Voice for Peace provide links with information on the 6 organizations and very quick ways for you to call on your congressional representatives to co-sponsor House Resolution 751 and with Secretary of State Blinken to condemn this designation. Number 3 recommends that you go to an American Friends Service Committee site that will let you urge your legislators to do several things: end military aid to Israel, support reconstruction in Gaza and end the blockade of Gaza, and very importantly, support HR 2590 that has a very long title, Defending the Human Rights of Palestinian Children and Families Living Under Israeli Military Occupation Act. This act seeks to ensure that United States taxpayer funds are not used by the government of Israel to support the military detention of Palestinian children, the unlawful seizure, appropriation, and destruction of Palestinian property, and forcible transfer of civilians in the West Bank, or further annexation of Palestinian land in violation of international law. And finally, we urge you to support Resolution F-184, titled Confronting Apartheid, at the Episcopal Diocese of Chicago's convention on November 20. This resolution calls on the Episcopal Church to recognize that the discriminatory legal regime that Israel imposes upon Palestinians constitutes apartheid under international law and is antithetical to the message of the Gospels and to our baptismal covenant. 2 other Episcopal dioceses in Vermont and Washington, D.C., will be considering similar resolutions, and the General Synod of the United Church of Christ passed resoundingly, very recently, a related declaration. You'll find the links for those connections in the chat. Thank you.
Thank you, Priscilla. Thank you very much. And I just been reminded that a link to the document Cry of Hope has also been placed in the chat, in case you have not read that. So at this point, we're open for questions. especially to Naim. So Naim, I just have one reflection of, I think it was the third International Sabile Conference in Bethlehem University. And Edward Said was the keynote speaker. And he came to speak not to the people who came to that conference, but to speak to his people. And I was just deeply, deeply moved. And Edward Browning, who had just retired as the presiding bishop of the Episcopal Church, preached at a service as well. So those international conferences brought people from all over the world to really to hear the voices of Palestinians and to take their message back home.
Yes. Yeah, we are very thankful for the international conferences. And you know, Desmond Tutu, Archbishop Desmond Tutu, was the patron of Sabeel for many years. And so he was involved with us. And I've always been thankful to Presiding Bishop Browning, because it was he who was able to really get the Friends of Sabile, FOSNA, registered as a non-profit, as a tax-exempt organization here. And so he has been a great, amazing supporter of Sabile. After he retired, you know, he really was a great contributor, also financial contributor to Sabile. So we've been blessed, you know, by so many people. And you know, Bishop Tutu came and spoken in Boston twice for Sabile on the Palestinian issue. And Bishop Tutu came to Jerusalem as a guest of the diocese, but he was very much supportive and involved in the work of Sabile. So, and Edward Said was an amazing guy who, I don't know whether you remember, in Bethlehem when he came, he really gave a wonderful speech, a wonderful lecture, and we had the most number of people ever to attend our meeting, our conference, when Professor Edward Said was with us. And he was a good friend of mine, which I appreciated, you know, over the years.
Right. Thank you, Naim. And we have a question for you. Could Canon Ateek speak to the current state of the Christian community in Palestine and how this community engages in solidarity with the Muslim community?
Thank you. Yeah, we believe that the Muslim community and the Christian community, we are all Palestinians. So we're the same the same people. We just have some Muslims and some Christians. And before 1948, we had also Palestinian Jews with us. So the Christian community and the Muslim community, we've been living side by side since the Muslims came in the 7th century to Palestine. And since then, gradually, more Muslims came, and we had good relationship. And amazingly, I believe that we did not have as many problems. I'm talking generally, in a general way. We did not have many problems vis-a-vis the Muslim community as in some other places or other countries. So generally speaking, the relationship between the Christians and the Muslims was okay. Obviously, we had our ups and downs, and mainly because of sometimes because of religious factors, but mainly because of political factors. You know, we've been occupied as Palestinian for many, many years, especially under the Turkish Empire, you know, for 400 years. So the Christians and the Muslims were in solidarity with one another most of that period also as well. And today, you know, maybe just one more thing, you know, Sabeel, again, many years ago, I mean, after Sabeel got started, we used to engage in an iftar, you know, iftar when the Muslims break the fast for during Ramadan, and Sabeel and another Christian organization, together we always invited Muslim people for an iftar. So again, the solidarity and the relationship between Muslims and Christians have been very strong. For me personally, I had very good relationship with the Mufti, who is the religious head of Jerusalem, and I was privileged to accompany him and another Muslim person as a delegation. We went to Denmark for several days, and I was the Christian that I was invited to be with them, and we spoke several times together in Denmark there. So this is just an example of the good relations that we enjoy with the Muslim community. And you know, whenever, as you remember, whenever we had tourists or pilgrims coming to us, and even in our conferences, they always opened the mosque for us, the Haram area in Jerusalem, and they would never turn us back. You know, we would get in touch with them, and we'd ask them that we have a group of friends coming from abroad, and they would welcome them into the Haram area to visit. They've always done it, and this is no exaggeration. So it's been a wonderful, and continues to be a wonderful relationship between Christians and Muslims.
I have
Thank
some
you.
questions in the chat for Naim Ateek. The first is, what has been the progress in promoting nonviolent protest in Palestine?
Naim, did you
Yes.
hear that question?
Yes, I heard it. I was just jotting it down.
I'll repeat it.
Thank you.
Oh,
Thank you for the question. I think, I mean, the only, for us, you know, in Palestine, the only resistance is really nonviolent. You know, I mean, we have maybe individuals that act maybe in a violent way, But generally speaking, I would say most of the resistance has been really done non-violently. Like say, and some people think that Muslims are violent people, but I've seen more non-violent Muslims than Christians many times. So, for example, when the Israeli government decided to clamp down on the Muslims in the Haram area, and they wanted to have cameras and security things to control the Muslim community for several days, for several weeks. The Muslim community was resisting non-violently. Sometimes I wish we have the Christian community would stand up. The problem back home is that people listen to their religious leaders. And in Jerusalem, especially, it's the bishops and the archbishops and the patriarchs who need to move so that the people will come after them. We don't have enough movement from the patriarchs and bishops that take the initiative in terms of nonviolent resistance. But outside, like say in Bethlehem, you find Christians and Muslims, and many Christians and clergy would go out demonstrating against the occupation. So there is, I would say, not enough. I'd like to see much more. But one of the problems is that the Israelis have been very heavily oppressing any violent or non-violent. For Israeli, non-violent is as bad as violent, if not worse, And so they clamp down on it immediately and try to suppress it.
Another question. Could you share some details about the Tuesday Kumi Now sessions and the Thursday Sabile Wave of Prayer Zoom meetings?
Sorry, it was not very clear. Please repeat the question. Sorry, I could not hear it well. It was not clear.
I will repeat. Can you share some information, please, about the Tuesday Kumi Now sessions and the Sabile Wave of Prayer Zoom meetings?
Yes, usually it's Thursday, every Thursday. Actually, this is started when I was still in Jerusalem. We used to meet every Thursday. We used to meet, the staff would meet for Bible study on Monday, but on Thursday we would have communion together. And our staff was from different denominations. So we had the Orthodox, the Catholic, and the Maronites, and the Copts, and so on. So we had people there together. So every Thursday we would meet for Holy Communion and have the Wave of Prayer meeting, prayers, and we also had lunch together in those days, So when I came here, and then Zoom started, we started having every Thursday again Bible study, and the Wave of Prayer. We've been doing it for over 10 years, which is prayers that we write in Jerusalem. Sabeel produced it in light of what was happening that week. So it is very fresh. It is what's happening to the Palestinian community, that the situation on hand. So that's the Wave of Prayer. And so we continued with that. We continue it. And I tell you, I usually just introduce the text of scripture and then people discuss it. We discuss it. And I believe that it has been a great blessing. God has been blessing us. Usually around 60 people come. Any of the people here would like to join us, you're welcome. Because, for example, today, it was an amazing session. The discussion was very rich. And it is through that we're also reflecting theologically and producing a theology of liberation among all of our people. And many of the people that join us from different countries. So we have from Canada, from Europe, from Britain, from France, sometimes from Netherlands, and from South Africa. We had people also that join us. So it's been a great blessing for us to have these prayers every Thursday.
This attendee says, thanks so much, Reverend Ateek, for your leadership and work related to liberation theology. My question is, similar to years past, are there in the works opportunities for Christians in the U.S. to worship together this Christmas with Palestinian Christians in Palestine via Zoom?
We usually have, at Christmas, there is usually one service that is conducted between the Lutheran Christmas Church in Bethlehem and the National Cathedral in DC. There is this one service where Palestinian Christians, mainly Lutherans and a few Anglicans, have the service. It's a wonderful, simple service, but I'm not really aware. Every now and then there might be some Zoom service. I'm aware of this one more than others, but I'm trying to think whether at least what I've told you is correct, about this service. And look for it, please. Usually it's maybe one few days before Christmas that is done, and usually the Lutheran bishop and the Anglican bishop, and sometimes the bishop of the diocese in DC. Yeah, she usually is present there, and they alternate between who's preaching, and then the singing in Arabic, and in English. Unfortunately, at times the technology has not still been worked out clearly, but it's there. This is the one that I know about.
Here's another very important question. Sometimes we get feedback that any direct resistance in the US and in the church, in particular that is pro-Palestinian, can make the work of Episcopal clergy in the Holy Land more difficult. What are your thoughts about this?
Yeah, this has been a problem for at least some people, but it might be, it's a two-edged sword, because sometimes it might be perceived as difficult for the local church there, because the Israelis would put greater pressure on the bishops and the movement of bishops and so on. But it also, at the same time, it could be a blessing, because I think when things go wrong back home, and there is more oppression, and there is more injustice, and there is more racist things, going on. I think it's very important for our churches here to take a stand, to speak out. In my opinion, for me, I will always welcome it. I would say, regardless of what's happening back home, I think we need to have the courage to if we are oppressed, so what? Jesus was persecuted, and Christians have been persecuted for their faith in many places. And we need the people to speak out here. So I would encourage bishops and leaders of the churches to speak out. But in order to do that, they need to be sure that what they're talking about is correct. And we can, at least I know with Sabile, in the past, we can help people, we can help the bishops and understand what's happening there. So we can write to them and give them the facts as we see it, as we read about it, and as we experience it. But once the facts are clear, we need people of courage to really take a stand and speak out, even if that means it hurts us or hurts some of our people, or mainly it's usually the bishops, and we need more courageous bishops to take a stand on these things as well. That would be my feeling.
Would Naim corroborate that Archbishop Tutu has said that apartheid is worse in Israel-Palestine than it was in South Africa?
Absolutely, absolutely. I have been to South Africa. And many of our friends from South Africa have come to Jerusalem. Archbishop Tutu was there, and I accompanied him and my bishop, when we went to some of the ministries, Israeli ministries, and I saw how Archbishop Tutu spoke clearly, but kindly, and yet sternly to some of the Israelis. And he told them, but what Israel is happening today is much, much worse. And this is the witness, the testimony of people from South Africa. So I believe that, and I think we have experienced it. And, especially today, and please, this is very important. What's happening in Israel today is that the religious Jewish extremists, this is very important. These are not secular people. I wish we're only living with secular people. We are living with today the people who control the government of Israel, the ministers in the government of Israel are mainly religious, Zionist, Jews, extremists. They're living in the settlements. The settlements under international law are illegal. But these ministers of government, they're living in these settlements. And they are the ones who are oppressing the Palestinians. The army usually just are there to protect the settlers, these religious settlers. And many of these religious settlers, hear me please well, they're Americans. They're Americans. They've come from the United States, and they are the worst in the way they have been dealing with the Palestinians. They're bigots, and they're unbelievably extremist in their, and they're the ones who are oppressing the Palestinians, and they are controlling the government today. So it's unbelievable. It's really unbelievable.
This question refers to early people in what we refer to today as the Holy Land, the area that comprises Israel and Palestine. The question is, how do we assess the earliest people of the land? Do Semitic people relate back to the Canaanites, who I'm told may have originated around Nablus excavations back in the 3rd and 4th millennia BCE? Do these early people explain who can truly claim earliest heritage?
Yeah, historically speaking, Palestine has always been like a corridor. You know, if you look at it in the map, and the big powers were in the north. In the south was all the big power was always Egypt, but then in the so many people. I mean, when these powers clashed in wars, they always clashed. Many of them clashed on the soil of Palestine, because it was the corridor. They had to go through Palestine to get to the north, and from the north to the south, they have to pass Palestine and Jordan. But that's the area there. And they were one area at one point. So we are a mixture of many, many different bloods and many different nations and many different backgrounds, ethnic, racial, and so on. So many of our people would say they're Canaanites, you know, but for us, we are the original people of the land. We've been there. Some of us come from Jewish backgrounds. We have many Christians whose ancestors were Jewish. We have Muslims whose ancestors were Jewish. Or, but we're a mixture of all these people. But we've been living there in the land, regardless of who the power or the powers that came and controlled us or occupied us, you know. And you know, historically speaking, you have the Syrians that were powers, the Assyrians, the Babylonians, the Persians, the Greeks later on, and the Romans at the time of Jesus. And all these powers controlled Palestine at one time or another, and some of them stayed after the powers changed, and so on. So this history is very rich in terms of the ethnicity and the racial background of our people there.
Done. Thank you. There's one more question. Simply, would you discuss the attempts of Israel to squeeze out the Christian community in the area of Jerusalem?
Yes, I mean, since 1967, Israel had a plan to gradually Judaize Jerusalem. They did not want to do it by driving people in mass. So the plan was to take the land slowly but surely, stripping people of their land and making it very difficult for people to come to Jerusalem. So most Palestinians cannot come to Jerusalem because they don't have permits. Israel would not allow them. And so the people of Jerusalem slowly are diminishing in number. And there are so many regulations and laws which Israel enacted that has squeezed the people of Jerusalem until today. And I tell you, those of you who are interested in this, there's plenty of material to look at. For example, you probably have been hearing about Sheikh Jarrah. This is an area in Jerusalem, not very close to the Damascus Gate, not very far from the Anglican Cathedral, our Episcopal Cathedral there, you know. And now the settlers, these people that I'm telling you about, these religious settlers, religious extremist settlers, They have taken part of this area, and the Palestinians are living there, and they're trying to get rid of the Palestinians, you know. And they had to go to the Supreme Court in Israel. And the Supreme Court, I don't know, but we feel the Palestinians have their deeds, their land deeds. They know that this land belongs to these people who are living on it. It is their land, but these settlers are trying to get them out. And what did the Supreme Court said to the settlers, to the Palestinians? You can stay there, but you need to pay rent to the settlers. These settlers are not from here, and they don't have the land. This is not their land. But you can see even the courts in Israel most of the time are standing with these settlers who are now controlling the army, and they are controlling the government. These people, and I'm not exaggerating, you can check everything I tell you. You know, it's all documented. And we know this is unbelievable. And so the Palestinians have refused, said, we're not going to pay rent. This is our land. There are so many stories going on there that is so unbelievable. You don't believe it. People in the States don't believe what's happening. And unfortunately, you have a very strong people who are standing up for Israel in this land, you know, and they make it very difficult. You know, they're the ones who are most of the time. I mean, I just read a friend of mine sent me a story about one woman from the Congress, and she is writing or encouraging President Biden not to open the consulate in East Jerusalem for the Palestinians. And what I was reading, and she's a congresswoman, but she doesn't know what she's talking about. Believe me, I'm not, you know, she doesn't know. Somebody probably asked her to do that and probably drafted the letter for her. But it is for those of us who live there, we know that that is nonsense, what she's writing. She doesn't know what's happening there. If people know, especially in the States, because you believe in democracy. In Israel, it's not a democracy. Israel is an apartheid state today. And this is what the Jews are saying. Many Jewish people in the States and even in Israel, people who are working for justice and peace, many of them are working with Sabeel today. And these people say, this is a racist state.
Naim, thank you so much. I just have to note that our time is running out. I want to thank you for your prophetic words and your witness, and for taking the time to be with us this evening.
You're welcome.
And so as we conclude these 4 sessions, I want to thank Tom Kaleo, the tech wizard at this church, who has kept us all connected, to Shelley Banks for setting up the registration site, for Wes Smedley, the rector who agreed that St. Chrysostom would be the home for these 4 sessions. I also want to thank the committee who planned these sessions: Caroline Krakoff, Betsy Lent, John McLeese, Kathleen Murphy, and Priscilla Reed. Finally, thanks to all of you who have participated in these sessions. I trust our paths will cross again as we continue on the journey for peace with justice in Palestine, Israel. Good night.
Good night.